What's up, everybody? I'm Flamin' Knight, and today I wanted to talk about the new set coming out, Wilds of Eldraine. Just trying to do a little bit of just kind of a mini set review. This isn't going to be exhaustive or anything. I'm not going to talk about every card in the set, but I just have a couple of standouts that I really wanted to talk about, just kind of from my personal brewing perspective. I'm not going to really be going into much of what's going to break the meta or anything, just kind of my personal thoughts and just kind of the cards I wanted to talk about and just what I want to start brewing around once the set releases in full. And to start off, this is kind of a little bit of a weird one. It's kind of a more honorable mention. Most of the other cards I'm going to be talking about more from the perspective of kind of Pioneer and Explorer, but this one in particular is one of the few cards in the set that I'm actually looking forward to playing with in Pauper in particular. This card is Hopeless Nightmare. It is 1 black for an enchantment. When Hopeless Nightmare enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. And then it also has another line. When Hopeless Nightmare is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, scry 2, and then it has a 3-mana activated ability to sacrifice it. I think this is going to be really cool to play with in Pauper. I think it could fit in a couple different strategies in particular. The build I'm kind of focused on working with this card in is something with Core Skyfisher in it to just kind of bounce it back to hand and just start replaying it over and over again. You can do things like play this along with cards like Omen of the Dead to kind of create loops with Core Skyfisher. Just kind of have some kind of black-white, kind of almost an ephemerate shell, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm still kind of working on it. But also we've seen Rakdos Burn be pretty good, and this, as well as burning straight to the face, also gets rid of cards in your opponent's hand. In Pauper in particular, it's a format really focused on using your resources effectively, so getting that extra value of just ripping cards from your opponent's hand seems very, very valuable to me. So the first card for Pioneer and Explorer in particular I want to talk about is Sleight of Hand. This is a reprint actually into the format. It is 1 blue for sorcery. Look at the top 2 cards, put one in your library, put one in your hand and one on the bottom. This is just one of the better cantrips in Magic's history. Obviously not the best, like something like Brainstorm or Preordain, but we don't really have access to those in Pioneer right now. So this is going to be kind of one of the next best, I think, behind Consider. I still think that one's a little bit better, but I think this is going to be better than something like Opt. I think this could fit into things like blue-red, Blitz-style decks, Is It Phoenix, that sort of thing. Mostly going to be Is It Phoenix, honestly. I feel like that deck in particular has kind of fallen off lately. I don't really think this is going to push it over the edge in any way, but it is definitely something to look out for. Next card I want to talk about is Regal Bunnycorn. It is 1 and a white for a creature, rabbit, unicorn. Probably one of the best type lines I've ever seen on a Magic card. It is a star where it says its power and toughness are each equal to the number of non-land permanents you control. I think this is just a really interesting ability for a card to have. It's not really something we've really seen in the format so far. I don't really think it's going to be that good. It's just the ceiling is just, it's a big creature for 2 mana, and I don't really think that's going to be too big, but just on the cuteness factor and just it being an interesting design, I just wanted to talk about it. I'm definitely going to try it out at least a little bit. Probably going to be ending up in some kind of token strategy, obviously, where you're just going to be crapping out permanents onto the board. Next up is one that I'm really excited for. It's Monstrous Rage. It is 1 red for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Create a monster roll token attached to it. So the rolls are kind of weird. They are token aura enchantments where you can only have 1 you control attached to a creature at one time. So it says in the reminder text, if you control another roll, put that into the graveyard and then enchant it. And then there's a couple different rolls that each do a different thing, but this one in particular gives +1/+1 and trample. The way I kind of like to think about this card is give a creature +2/+0, put a counter on a +1/+1 counter and a trample counter on it. That is pretty good. In particular, one of my favorite strategies, Boros Heroic, seems just like a perfect fit for this. Just being able to buff up a creature a pretty sizable amount, and then also being able to keep trample and a buff on top of that. It's something I really want to try out and have recur it with things like Feather or Dreadhorde Arcanist. It just seems really good there. Next up, I have Up the Beanstalk. It is 1 and a green for an enchantment. When this enters the battlefield and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. Pretty obviously, this is something that slots directly into decks like Mono Green Nykthos. It's a permanent, it adds to your devotion, and you're already casting giant spells. You got the Cavalier, you have anything, pretty much anything you can pull off your Karn board, Storm the Festival, all sorts of big mana spells. I'm not entirely sure if this is like an auto include or probably just like a 1 or 2 of, because I'm just not sure if you really want to cut threats for this, but definitely something to look at, and definitely something I'm going to be playing in some kind of big red-green ramp deck that I want to just get some extra value with. Up next are kind of 2 cards that I want to talk about together. The first is Tangled Colony. It is 1 and a black for a rat. It is a 3/2 that cannot block, but it says when it dies, create X 1/1 black rat creature tokens that can't block, where X is the amount of damage dealt to it. So I've already been kind of messing around in the background with a couple different variations of a rat tribal deck in Explorer. Even without the new rats from the set, it was much better than I expected. In particular, Kuromonyx, the new rat kind of pseudo-lorded from Phyrexia, is just an absolute powerhouse. It's pretty much a Goblin Rabble Master for 1 less mana, and if your deck has the right capacity of rats in it, you're usually drawing 3 to 4 cards when you play it, and it's just insane. And to top it off, the toxic buff that you give all your rats is nothing to scoff at, especially with something like this where you can go really wide if your opponent decides to block it with something big. The other card in particular with the kind of rat theme that I want to talk about was Lord Skitter Sewer King. It is 2 and a black for a 3/3 rat noble, a legendary creature. Whenever another rat enters the battlefield under your control, exile up to 1 target card from an opponent's graveyard. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 black rat creature token that can't block. So it's like a Legion War Boss pretty much, except rats. It's just good. Like, it's plain and simple. Just making tokens every turn, exiling things from graveyards. In particular, exiling from graveyards is something that always seems relevant. The more time goes on, it seems the more graveyard recurring strategies get printed into every format. So this is just always going to be a good thing to have. And definitely excited to put this in some of the rat tribal brews I've been building, and maybe even this is something also you could try in something of like a white-black token strategy using things like Skrell's Hive from Phyrexia as well. Next up is kind of a weird one, but is also another card that'll fit into a strategy I've already played and actually have a video on my channel already. This card is Sire Ginger, the Meal Ender. That was the first time I read the name in full. That is amazing. It is a 2 mana legendary artifact creature Food Knight. It is a 3/1 and says it has trample, hexproof, and haste as long as an opponent controls a planeswalker. Now that ability is not going to be relevant all of the time, and honestly it's kind of gravy on top of the rest of what it does. Because for me, at least in the decks that I want to play it in, the ability that really matters is whenever another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it and scry 1. As I mentioned earlier, I already have a deck on the channel, Boros Michigo, where it's a red-white artifact and enchantments strategy where you're using Michigo's Reign of Truth and all that glitters to try to just buff up your creatures real big. And I think this is something that'll slot very nicely into it, especially now that we have things like Shrapnel Blast in the format. So I'm really excited to put that deck together now that we have things like this and Shrapnel Blast. And so definitely expect seeing another video on that deck in particular. Next up is a card I'm probably not going to be getting around to building, mostly because it's a mythic. But it is still one I'm pretty interested in. It is Baluna Grand Squall. It is a 3 mana 4/4 Teamer colors, green, blue, red. It has an adventure on it, which is Seek Thrills for 2 green, blue, red. It is an instant that says mill 7 cards, then put all cards that have adventure from among the milled cards into your hand. And then the giant itself has trample and says permanent spells you cast that have an adventure cost 1 less to cast. This is a card I think will fit particularly well into a kind of pre-existing archetype that's fallen off recently. It's Teamer Adventures, as you can probably guess from the adventure theme that this card has, but there was a deck towards Explorer and Pioneers, kind of early days of that was Team Adventures using things like Bonecrusher Giant, Brazen Borrower, Edgewall Innkeeper, and in particular Lucky Clover to really get a lot of value out of the adventure spells from Eldraine. And I think this is just pretty much perfectly made to slot directly into that deck. I'm not sure if it's going to be very good. The adventure deck really hasn't seen a lot of play lately, but I'm definitely interested in trying it out at least. Next up is one I'm not sure exactly has a home, but I still think is a pretty interesting design at least. We have Werefox Bodyguard, 1 white for a 2/2. It is an elf fox knight that has flash and says whenever it enters the battlefield, exile up to one other target non-fox creature until Werefox Bodyguard leaves the battlefield, and then has an activated ability of 1 and a white to sacrifice it to gain 2 life. We've seen lots of variations on this type of card. Like we already have Brutal Cathar, and this isn't going to swipe its place anytime soon just because that card only really sees play in the humans shell. It having flash and not being legendary like that card that I cannot remember the name from Kaldheim. I think it's interesting. The non-fox creature obviously is just a release valve, so you can't just get infinite ETBs off of it. Definitely, now that we have more of a density of these type of effects, it might be worth it to try to do some kind of more Death and Taxes style build. Not necessarily going all the way, but just kind of trying to play out things like Thalia and playing out these Fiend Hunter type cards where you're just trying to exile your opponent's creatures and maybe having some kind of protection spells, but those don't really work with Thalia. I'm not really sure what the home is, but it's definitely a powerful effect being a flash creature as well, but just not entirely sure on the home. All right, now we're getting into the cards that I'm really excited for. This one in particular, I'm not sure if it will be any good, but it is exactly the kind of thing I want to do in Magic, and I'm hoping soon that this type of strategy will have a little bit of a boost to it in the format. This card in particular is Heartflame Duelist. It is 1 and a white for a human knight that says instant and sorcery spells you control have lifelink, and it is a 3/1. But also, as you can see, it has a red adventure spell on it, Heartflame Slash for 2 and a red. It is an instant and says deal 3 damage to any target. So I've tried many a time to make red-white burn work in the format, and it is just not doing anything effective. I don't really think this is going to fix any of the problems it has. I'm still going to try to play it because I think it's fun and cool, and at least it does have a little bit of play of helping the more burn style strategy not get run over by the kind of more boots on the ground red deck wins decks. But I don't think it's gonna fix any of the major problems that the deck has, but I'm hoping with things like this and hopefully soon getting Boral's Charm on Arena, there'll be at least some kind of fun deck to play that might not necessarily be top of the format or anything, but I'm still holding out for getting Lightning Helix in Pioneer. Please, Wizards, just reprint Lightning Helix into Pioneer. I'm begging you. Next up, we have another banger of a card, Mosswood Dread Knight. It is a 1 and a green for a human knight that is a 3/2. It has trample, and when it dies, you may cast it from your graveyard as an adventure until the end of your next turn. Oh, but what's the adventure, you say? I'm glad you asked. It's Dread Whispers for 1 and a black. It is a sorcery that says you draw a card and lose 1 life. This thing is just nuts. I'm at a loss for words. Why does it have trample? Why is it a 3/2? Why is it a 3/2 for 2? What? Why is it overcosted with a keyword and an adventure? How are you ever killing this? But I'm not entirely sure what it goes in right now. There are a couple green-black strategies mostly focused on using things like fight rigging to cheat dumb garbage in the play, which those I'm not the biggest fan of personally, just because they're more glass cannon type strategies. And that's just not really my type of play style. But something like this, I think we could try to see some kind of like green-black or maybe even going Jund, very kind of grindy value type deck. Maybe a little bit reminiscent of the old style Jund decks of Moderns. But definitely excited to try this out. There's just a lot of power packed into 2 mana here. And finally, this is probably my favorite card from the set and the one that I think is the most powerful. It is Questing Druid. For 1 and a green, we have a 1/1 human druid that says whenever you cast a spell that's white, blue, black, or red, put a 1/1 counter on it. And then it has an adventure for 1 and a red. There's an instant, notably an instant. Exile the top 2 cards of your library until your next end step. You may play those cards. So we got a Quirion Dryad stapled to almost a Reckless Impulse, and that's just nuts. Honestly, like, you have one of the best red card draw spells that's just slightly tweaked, and honestly, kind of a little bit better being an instant. Notably, it says until your next end step, not your next turn, like something like Reckless Impulse, but you can, because it's an instant, you can play it on your opponent's turn and then just have those cards available to you until your next end step. They won't go away after your opponent's turn is over. So you can hold up things like removal spells at instant speed while you also have this, and then you just have a body that will just get big. It's just going to get big. I really want to play this in some kind of red-green stompy strategy, playing a lot of red cards like Reckless Stormseeker, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Bone Crusher Giant, that sort of thing. Kind of probably a variation on the kind of red-green boats strategy. Probably dropping the boats, to be honest, but maybe there's room for Asika's Chariot. This is just a powerhouse of card advantage and just being a good body that'll scales with the rest of the game. So those are my thoughts on the set. These are the cards that I just think are pretty cool, and are things that I'm personally going to be messing around with. Personally, I don't really think I have the authority to say whether these are going to be breaking the meta open or anything, but they're just cards that I thought were cool, I wanted to talk about, and are going to be a little sneak peek of what I'm going to be working on with upcoming videos. Let me know what your thoughts are on the set. Are my takes on any of these cards dog shit? Do you think I missed something from the set? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, consider leaving a like and subscribing, and I hope to see you in the next one.